Hamas is being crushed in the Gaza Strip as Division 98 and 162 are expanding the maneuver, and Hamas negotiators continue to drag their feet, refusing to discuss some clauses that will need to be resolved if progress is going to be made. We will bring you what the IDF is doing in the Gaza Strip right now, even as United States President Donald Trump announced over the weekend that 10 hostages will be released very soon from Gaza. In Syria, the ceasefire is only now beginning following almost a week of intense violence that resulted in nearly 1,000 fatalities and many more wounded. And next door, in Lebanon, targeted strikes have led to the elimination of many Hezbollah operatives, while the United States gives Hezbollah an ultimatum on disarmament. Last but not least, Iran is continuing to make threats, with one official saying that continuing development of a nuclear bomb is on the table. We will bring you updates about Iran's behind-the-scenes move despite the blow it suffered in the last month's 12-day war against Israel, as President Trump exposes the full extent of the damage to Iran's nuclear facilities. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host, Yair Pinto, reporting about all the truth from Israel. While the IDF forces continue to fight in the Gaza Strip, with forces taking control over launch positions, weapons depots, while many other terror infrastructures were destroyed from the air. The goal now is the defeat of the remaining Hamas battalions in Beit Hanoun, while the defense establishment in Israel is preparing for the establishment of the humanitarian city. In just under 2 months, Division 36 destroyed tunnels in that city, and at the same time, the fighters are demolishing hundreds of buildings every week around the segmentation routes, which in Khan Yunis alone stretch over 20 kilometers. The IDF says we need 300 meters on both sides of the route from which they will not be able to hit the forces that will remain there. And meanwhile, the negotiations for the release of the hostages and a long-term ceasefire continue in Doha, Qatar. But although Israel agreed to show flexibility on the issue of withdrawing forces from the Gaza Strip, Hamas has still not given a response regarding the proposed outline. However, a source from one of the mediators said there is optimism that the talks are indeed advancing. However, the war is not over yet, and following concrete warnings, the IDF fears an attempt by Hamas to kidnap a soldier in the Gaza Strip. In the northern arena, after several days of Israeli strikes in Syria, the United States announces that an agreement for a ceasefire had been reached between the sides. However, according to footage posted online from Syria in the Druze strongholds of Es-Saweda in the south of the country, violent crashes are still raging. The number of fatalities on the sides after almost a week of fighting is nearly 1,000, with many more wounded. Druze community leaders in Israel and in Syria asked Jordan to open a corridor to bring humanitarian aid at its border with Syria, which is closer to the conflict zone than Israel's border. And nearby, in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley region, several Hezbollah operatives were taken out in targeted strikes over the weekend. This reportedly included the official in charge of the Yahmur compound. This came after last Thursday's 2 terrorists from the organization Hezbollah, who were engaged in restoring terror infrastructure, were eliminated. Meanwhile, Washington is insisting on a binding timetable for the dismantling of the organization's heavy weapons within the ceasefire framework. The Prime Minister of Lebanon's internationally recognized government said what is required is the logic of a state, not of militants. Amidst all of this rhetoric, the Americans' envoy is expected to arrive in Beirut this week with the document detailing an Israeli withdrawal in exchange for concentrating the weapons in the hands of the state of Lebanon. Circling back to Iran, we'll also bring you a closer look at how Iran continues to operate in several arenas against Israel, also in Iraq and also in Lebanon. And according to CNN, the Ayatollah regime is working to strengthen its control in the region, and is trying to rearm the terror organizations that it built throughout the Middle East. And since the ceasefire between Israel and Iran, it is trying to rehabilitate the proxies as the Houthis in Yemen have returned to attacking vessels. The Kurds' oil production capability in Iraq was disrupted, and smuggling attempts to Lebanon have been recorded. However, as President of the United States posted recently on his Truth social media network, if the Iranians want to renew their nuclear project, they will have to start over because the previous sites were erased. So we have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel and in the Middle East, and this is day 653 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are taking their orders from Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we start, I would like to call on you to help us share the truth. So guys, leave a comment, leave a like, and share this video. And most importantly, hit the subscribe button so that you'll know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We will begin with a boots on the ground report about what's happening in the battle against the Hamas terrorist organization in the Gaza Strip. So, IDF forces under the Southern Command of the IDF continue to operate, directed by the military intelligence and the Shin Bet against the terrorist organizations throughout the Gaza Strip. And Division 162 forces continue to operate in the northern parts of Gaza. During the past 24 hours, the forces eliminated terrorists from the ground and in airstrikes and continued destroying terror infrastructure and weapons depots above and below the ground. And Division 99 forces are also operating in the northern and central parts of Gaza. And during the past 24 hours, the forces exposed enemy infrastructure and destroyed several terror infrastructures in the Beit Hanoun area. Division 98 forces are expanding the fighting in the Gaza City area, with the Divisional Fire Center directing strikes to eliminate terrorists and destroy terror infrastructure in that sector. Ground forces operated in the past 24 hours and destroyed launch positions, sniper positions, and weapons depots in that area. And in the past 24 hours, the Air Force also struck about 90 terror targets across the Gaza Strip in coordination with the maneuvering forces. And amongst the targets that were attacked were military compounds, buildings associated with terrorists, and underground infrastructure, together with additional terror infrastructures that were found. In Division 36 that is operating in Yunis, they parted in recent days from the standing paratroopers brigade. The largest city within its sector in the Gaza Strip has become the main focus of the fighting, with more than 10 kilometers of new tunnels that were discovered and destroyed over the past 2 months, and with an unprecedented rate of building demolitions. And over the weekend, 2 IDF reservists were seriously wounded in Yunis when the vehicle that they were traveling in inside an area that is supposed to be under high operational control of IDF forces along the northern to the southern Tangier axis drove over an IED. And meanwhile, alongside reports of an approaching ceasefire, IDF forces operating in the Gaza Strip are increasing the pace of demolitions that could serve terrorists in the future or that served them in the past. The army says that each such building is easily incriminated by prior Hamas use for observation the forces of Israel, rigging explosives, and deploying snipers, or is liable to be used as such in the future. For example, according to details of an investigation concluded in the Golani Infantry Brigade of the IDF, in the serious incident, which was about 10 days ago, a force from the brigade's reconnaissance unit seized a building as part of an advance to breach the new segmentation axis, Magen Oz, and the other forces were then supposed to destroy adjacent buildings as part of opening and securing the axis. But they did not manage to do so, and a Hamas terror cell that hid overnight in one of the buildings carried out an ambush, which resulted in one IDF fatality and several other soldiers that were wounded. So incidents like this prompted the IDF to issue a statement saying, "We do not destroy buildings just to destroy them, but every such segmentation axis that we open requires flattening the buildings on both sides for at least a range of 300 meters on each side so that the buildings do not constitute a threat to the forces that will remain on the axis and cannot strike them from there." In this regard, only the segmentation corridors in Khan Yunis, Morag, and the new Magen Oz corridor approach 20 kilometers in length, which is 3 times the Netzarim segmentation corridor and almost twice the length of the Philadelphia corridor in the south, bordering Gaza and Egypt. On both sides of these corridors, under the IDF control, thousands of buildings have already been leveled to the ground. As the IDF expands these segmentation corridors, it also requires more forces to deploy in positions along them for defensive missions, which are by nature static. This is in addition to leveling buildings and permanently deploying forces in the new security zone of the buffer area along the border, whose establishment has not yet been completed. So Division 36 forces, which are currently operating 3 brigade combat teams in Khan Yunis in Gaza, including the 188 Golani and Kfir brigades, effectively control about 30% of the Strip's territory, yet have not reached large Hamas centers or gravity in the city, including the Qatari Hamid neighborhood in the west of the city, the Khan Yunis refugee camp, and the displaced persons city of El Mawasi near the Khan Yunis coast. In this large tent city, about 800,000 Gazans are gathered, while large numbers of Hamas operatives are also using the cover provided by the large crowds to move, gather intelligence, and plan future attacks against Israel. The IDF operates in the city while concerned about the presence of hostages there, and part of the division's activity has also been halted and altered in recent days. Division 36 achievements, such as locating and destroying more than 10 kilometers of tunnels in Khan Yunis in the past 2 months, provide a mirror image of Hamas's capabilities in areas where the IDF has not yet fought again in the Gaza Strip, or has not fought at all in the central and the western Gaza City neighborhoods, Deir el-Balach, Nusirat, and additional towns in the northern and the central parts of Gaza. It is also important to remember that there is an intensified intelligence effort by the ISA and Amman Israeli intelligence agencies to locate senior command of the terrorist organizations, field commanders, terror elements who participated in the October 7th massacre, and real-time targets that threatened the IDF soldiers and the Israeli home front and terror infrastructures while exploiting operational opportunities in the field. The purpose of this maneuver right now is to defeat the Beit Hanoun battalion and other frameworks in which terrorists are located in Jabalia, Sajaiya, and Beit Hanoun. And ahead of the day after the agreement with Hamas in the defense establishment, there is a major effort to shape the buffer area at a range of 800 meters to 1.5 kilometers from the border by means of security components, electricity and water infrastructure, advanced technologies, observation means, and logistical routes. This involves maintenance of the new fence line along the entire Gaza Strip and upgrading the existing line. It is important to note that during the fighting there has been erosion in conditions at various crossings. In the Ministry of Defense, they are considering solutions for gates and the weak points that were exposed on the 7th of October on the border between Israel and Gaza. Then, thousands of Palestinian terrorists penetrated Israeli territory. And meanwhile, the Ministry of Defense, the IDF, and the civilian companies are securing the distribution of humanitarian aid and, in parallel, preparing to build a new humanitarian aid distribution area in Rafah in the case that the negotiations collapse and a humanitarian city is established in Rafah. So guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to update you every day on every development in what's happening in Gaza. And now, let's move on to the negotiations to release our hostages. But first, I want to ask you to help us share the truth. So guys, leave a comment, leave a like, and share this video. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button. I also want to talk to you for a moment about the economic situation and challenges that we are facing here in Israel amidst this war that has been going on for so long. Because thousands of hardworking men and women across Israel are doing everything that they can to get back on their feet, even while the fighting is still going on. Business owners, artisans, farmers, shopkeepers, many of them pause everything to serve in the IDF and defend. So, also to evacuate if they are living in war zones or just to survive. Now, they're trying to rebuild what was lost. And that is exactly where Artza comes in. Artza partners directly with small businesses in Israel, so they buy their handmade products and share them with people around the world through their subscription boxes. Every box brings real income to people working hard to start over in Israel, to reopen workshop, restock a shelf, or simply just pay the bills. So guys, if you want to support the recovery and the rebuilding of Israel, go to www.artzabox.com/TBNIL and use the code TBNIL for a 10% discount out of your subscription. Guys, that's www.artzabox.com/TBNIN. And it's a simple way to help Israeli families move forward and also get a piece of Israel into your house. Now, we're getting back into the news and shifting our focus to the negotiations in Doha, Qatar, which will hopefully lead to the release of the hostages and a permanent end to this war. So political sources that are familiar with the negotiations claim that Hamas continues to drag out time. But despite the gaps between the two sides, which are considerable, the agreement may be announced already in the coming days because of intense American pressure. Until then, the fighting in the Gaza Strip is at a low confrontational level until the Security Cabinet decides otherwise. However, this means that in the meantime, negotiations are conducted under fire. Israeli sources say that Hamas is obstructing the talks, refusing to discuss key issues such as lists of terrorists that they want to release from Israeli prisons in exchange for the hostages' release. Another issue on which Hamas refuses to advance is regarding the maps of the IDF deployment in and around the Gaza Strip that Israel presented even after significant compromises. And meanwhile, on Thursday, at 2 in the morning, an updated mediator's proposal was placed before Israel and Hamas, and the sides are examining it in an attempt to jumpstart the terror organization and move forward with these negotiations. For now, the sides' positions on it have not been conveyed. Israeli sources also claim that despite the compromises to which the negotiating teams agreed regarding the scope of the withdrawal, Israel did not agree to withdraw to the lines that Hamas wants. However, the sources did not deny the understandings regarding withdrawal from the Morag corridor into the area that the IDF has cleared in recent weeks. And despite the Israeli willingness, the negotiations encounter and continue to encounter many difficulties in light of Hamas's refusal and foot-dragging, which may indicate that the terrorist organization is buying time, which Israeli negotiators warn is a losing strategy, as time is not on Hamas's side. And as stated, the main issue on which Hamas places an obstacle to the negotiations is the issue of the prisoners' keys, and this is what delays reaching a ceasefire agreement. The organization insists on not moving to discussion on this issue despite the mediator's commitment to progress in these talks over the past 2 weeks and the fact that the United States stands alongside Israel. However, During the past week, an additional Israeli channel of talks opened in Cairo on humanitarian issues, and progress was made on some of the topics. And despite the difficulties, Israel is not closing the door on the negotiations and continues to compromise on various issues on the table. Security officials have warned that a return to war, as Netanyahu commits, includes the establishment of the humanitarian city after 60 days and will cost the lives of soldiers who will return to fight in areas in which Hamas has infiltrated in Gaza. With all that in mind, let's take a closer look at the details of the proposed deal, which are known so far. So, during the 60 days of the ceasefire, 10 hostages will be returned alive, 8 on the first day and 2 more on the 15th day, and in return Israel will release security prisoners, including some who are serving life sentences. In addition, talks on ending the war will begin during the ceasefire, and pressure is expected from the mediators led by the United States of America to lead to ending this war. However, the American envoy Steve Witkoff has still not arrived in Doha, Qatar, or the area, since he intends to wait for the moment when a breakthrough arrives that will pave the way to an agreement. Guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on all these diplomatic developments. As always, we invite you to be part of the team and help us share the truth of what's happening in Israel. Guys, in order to do that, please leave a comment, let us know where you're coming from, leave a like, share this video, and hit that subscribe button. The most important thing you can do is pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And now, let's take a closer look at recent American efforts to bring home calm and stability to the Middle East after nearly 2 years of high-intensity activity in several countries, particularly Israel, but not only here. The Trump administration in Washington is working day and night to bring the situation under control. And in remarks over the weekend, United States President Donald Trump said that 10 Israeli hostages are expected to be released very soon from the Gaza Strip. He also posted Saturday on his Truth social media network that all 3 nuclear sites in Iran were destroyed and or completely erased. According to him, it will take years to bring them back into operation, and if Iran wants to do that, it would be better for it to start again in 3 different places. And elsewhere, the American Special Envoy to Syria, Thomas Bark, officially announced the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Syria on Saturday evening following intensive negotiations. That's a lot of activity for one weekend, so let's break it down one piece at a time. During a festive dinner at the White House over the weekend, President Donald Trump said, "We expect to bring back another 10 additional hostages in the near future from Gaza and hope to close the affair quickly." He also surprised the world in a dramatic statement posted on his social media, Truth, in which he claimed that a special military operation completely eliminated Iran's 3 central nuclear facilities. He wrote, "It will take the Iranians many long years to restore what was destroyed, and if they want to return to nuclear activity, they will have to start again somewhere else." Is that correct? Let me know what you think in the comments, guys. For sure, the Iranian nuclear facility at Fordo was indeed almost entirely destroyed, and its activity is expected to halt for about 2 years at least. However, the 2 other facilities at Natanz and Isfahan sustained very severe but apparently partial damage, and according to various sectors and other officials, if the Iranians invest effort, they may return to full operational activity within only months to a few short years. In response to the contradiction between the 2 reports, American officials expressed concerns that Iran may exploit the gap in understanding of this situation and accelerate its efforts to renew nuclear activity at the Natanz and Isfahan sites earlier than expected. For instance, CIA Director John Ratcliffe recently gave a closed briefing to members of Congress in which he noted that the operation indeed caused very significant and very severe damage to Iran's nuclear program, but that the damage was not total. However, according to him, some of the facilities were completely destroyed and most of the enriched uranium stockpiles at Fordo and Isfahan were buried under the rubble, something that will make it very difficult for Iran to restore its capabilities in the near term. And at the same time, it has been published that the Trump administration chose to reject a proposal for a much broader military plan over fears of getting bogged down. According to NBC, President Trump rejected the plan called All or Nothing, prepared by the head of the United States Central Command, General Eric Kurilla. This plan focused on striking 6 central nuclear facilities of Iran in an intensive military operation that was expected to last several weeks and would undoubtedly have brought about tremendous and perhaps permanent damage to the Iranian nuclear project. However, President Trump rejected the plan because he did not want to entangle the United States in a long conflict that could bring a sharp regional response and endanger the American soldiers. Elsewhere, in a possible diplomatic blow to Israel, a United States federal court canceled a presidential order by President Trump that imposed sanctions on officials of the International Criminal Court in The Hague. The order, imposed originally in order to protect American soldiers and civilians, as well as Israeli citizens from international investigations, was defined by Judge Nancy Tursin as an infringement on freedom of expression and an unconstitutional restriction. Canceling the order is expected to lead to significant legal and diplomatic implications, since the move includes removing sanctions imposed on the court's chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, and on 4 additional judges. The Trump administration claimed that the court's actions are politicization and illegitimate activities against the United States and against Israel, and canceling the order is perceived as a hard blow to Washington and to Jerusalem. However, the administration has other tools to push back against the International Court and its absurd obsession with going after officials in democratic countries like the United States and Israel while ignoring blatant violations of international law by rogue regimes and terrorists. And with all of this in mind, we can say that events of the past 48 hours reflect a complex and changing reality in the Middle East. The ceasefire between Israel and Syria marks a new direction of regional stability, but on the other hand, a declaration and contradictory reports surrounding the true state of Iran's nuclear program, together with the legal move regarding the International Court, may dramatically affect the future of the entire region. These are days of alertness and expectation, and here at TBN Israel, we will continue to monitor and update you on all the developments. So guys, to all of you, if you want to help us reach more people, please leave a comment, hit the like button, share this video, and hit that subscribe button so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And now, we are switching our focus to a report coming from Lebanon about IDF aircrafts conducting a strike that took out Ahmed Muhammad Salah, the official in charge of the Yahmur compound in the Hezbollah terrorist organization, who was engaged in restoring terror infrastructure in southern Lebanon. This is the second elimination in less than 24 hours in the Lebanon sector. In the IDF statement, it was written that Salah was engaged in an attempt to restore the organization's terrorist infrastructure in the Yahmur area in southern Lebanon. Well, he won't be doing that any longer. As a reminder, last week, Defense Minister Israel Katz revealed that the Hezbollah terrorist organization is trying to restore its raiding capabilities towards Israel and sent a message to the Lebanese government that it is responsible for any violation of this agreement, saying, "We will strike every terrorist and thwart every threat to the residents of the north and to the state of Israel and respond with maximum force against any attempt to rebuild. In addition, the Lebanese newspaper Nida El-Watan reported on Saturday that the United States set a timetable for up to 4 months of Hezbollah disarmament. And according to the American sources, the timetable is supposed to be accompanied by reciprocal steps aimed at establishing the ceasefire between Israel and between Lebanon. It should be noted that on Friday, the Secretary General of the terrorist organization, Naim Qassem, declared that the organization will not hand over its weapons to Israel and will not be humiliated. As I've said before, I think it's way past time for him to be worrying about that, because they were humiliated pretty bad in this war. But in any case, according to the Lebanese newspaper's report, American officials expressed a desire to move forward and insisted on a timetable that would require Hezbollah to give up heavy weapons. In continuation, it was reported that the American envoy Tom Barak will again try to impose the timetable on Lebanon during his next visit next week. And meanwhile, the Prime Minister of Lebanon's internationally recognized government, Nawaf Salem, responded last night to Qassem's speech and other recent developments. And according to him, the American document that Barak presented is based on a central idea that coordinates between the full Israeli withdrawal, completing the process of expanding the authority of the state of Lebanon and restricting the weapons to the hands of the state. What is required is to hand the weapons to the Lebanese state instead of Israel bombing them. The current stage requires applying the logic of a state and not a logic of militias. Beyond that, Lebanon's prime minister emphasized in the interview that we do not want a civil war in Lebanon, and no Lebanese want to return to a civil war. We should not be dragged into a new adventure. Regarding the subject of rebuilding infrastructure in Lebanon after the war, Salem said that the current financial aid is not enough to cover the expenses, which are estimated by the World Bank at about $14 billion. He also noted that so far Lebanon has received $250 million from the World Bank, $350 million from United Nations organizations, $20 million from Iraq, and a commitment from France of $75 million. Guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to bring you all the truth about what's happening in Lebanon and how it relates to Israel and to the wider region. And in the meantime, hit that subscribe button. And guys, we conclude today's report with a close look at a very, very important topic, and that is the fate of our Druze brothers and sisters who are in a great danger from the Sunni jihadist extremists in Syria. The clashes in Syria between Sunni Bedouin tribes and the Druze community renewed last Friday when about 200 Bedouin fighters entered into the city of Saweda and continued the fighting using both light and heavy weapons. To make a brief comment, you might remember that immediately following the fall of the Assad regime in Syria back in December, Israel's Air Force launched a massive campaign of strikes on weapon stockpiles that were left behind by the regime's armed forces. And over the next several months, IDF ground forces went into Syria in the southern parts of Syria and captured even more weapons and ammunitions that were left behind by the regime. Israel got some criticism from these strikes and even the ground incursion that removed so many weapons and so much ammunition from that country. But now, maybe people will understand why all of this was necessary and beneficial. Can you imagine how much worse these clashes might have been if the jihadist groups had more ammunition to fire at their supposed enemies, the Druze people, or at Israel? As it is, there are estimates of close to 1,000 fatalities in the fighting over the past week, with many more wounded, and Israel was very reluctant to allow El-Julani regimes and the forces loyal to him to come south to Damascus in large numbers, but over the weekend, under intense American and international pressure, Israel was compelled to allow regime forces to enter Es-Saweda for 48 hours in an attempt to restore order there. Earlier, Foreign Minister Gideon Saar of Israel ordered the transfer of humanitarian aid to the Druze in Saweda against the background of the recent attacks and the severe humanitarian situation in that area. The aid package, worth 2 million shekels, included, amongst other things, food packages and medical equipment, and is funded from the Foreign Ministry's budget. The aid will be directed in a focused way to the Druze areas in the Saweda governorate that were directly affected by the violent attacks, and joins a previous aid package that the Israeli Foreign Ministry transferred to the Druze in Syria last March. And meanwhile, it was reported in Arab media that Bedouin militias in Syria are trying to make their way toward the combat area in Saweda, while the Syrian army is placing checkpoints on the road from Damascus to Saweda in order to prevent them from reaching their destination and renewing the heavy clashes. It's important to understand that despite declarations of an agreement by the United States, the Syrian government, the Druze leadership, and the Bedouin tribes, exchanges of fire continued also in the past 24 hours in the Saweda government in southern Syria. In other words, a ceasefire was indeed declared, but underground clashes did not stop for a moment. Candidly, no one should be surprised by this, as religious and ethnic minorities are never truly safe in countries with a Sunni jihadist regime. In this context, it's important to remember that Christians in Syria have also come under attack in recent months. In the Jordanian capital of Amman on Saturday, a meeting was held of the foreign ministries of Jordan and Syria and the American envoy Tom Barak in order to bring about the implementation of an agreement. This followed Friday evening's announcement by Barak that Israel and Syria reached a ceasefire with United States support. A source told the government news agency that Interior Ministry forces and the security apparatus began deploying in the government ostensibly to implement the first stage of the ceasefire understandings by stopping clashes between gunmen. And according to the source, this is a step towards restoring stability and releasing the detainees. Meanwhile, the spiritual leadership of the Druze in Syria, represented by Sheikh Hikmat el-Hijari, declared that the government forces will deploy outside the administrative boundaries of the Saweda government in order to control clashes and to prevent gunmen from infiltrating this government. It was also reported that the Bedouins who remain in the government will be allowed to leave safely, accompanied by security personnel without opposition. The leadership noted that any party that violates the agreement will bear responsibility for the collapse of these understandings. And Syrian President Abu Muhammad al-Julani, in his speech, jabbed at leaders in the Druze community in Syria, and according to him, separatist aspirations have arisen amongst figures seeking external support. Referring to Bedouins, he said, the Arab tribes have always been a symbol of noble values and principles. We call on them to adhere fully to the ceasefire in Saweda. Guys, here at TBN Israel, we will pray for the Druze and all the minorities in the Middle East, and we ask you to unite in prayer with us for this situation. So when you are praying, let's make it personal. Let's pray for the IDF soldiers, for the Israeli leaders, for your leaders that are making decisions in this region to make wise, godly decisions. And let's pray for all the innocent lives that are being hurt and harmed by all these terrorist activities to feel God's love. Okay? Let's pray for peace in this region. Let's pray for the peace of Jerusalem. God is listening to prayers. So let's unite in prayer and let's stand with Israel in this situation.